Hello everyone, it's again your host Alfie, and welcome to another episode of The World's Finest. Today I have my good friend Jake with me. Say hi, Jake.
Hey, what's going on?
Well, Jake, what are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to be talking about our favorite Batman writers, and not just our favorite Batman writers. We're going to be talking about the Mount Rushmore of Batman. So, the four best creators you can possibly think of that you would put up as an icon forever, enshrined forever.
Yeah, like who's connected to the character in our minds? If we had to make a country dedicated to Batman, who are the founders? Who are the people that throughout all of history are going to be remembered for? These guys.
Exactly, right. Who are the founding fathers of Batman?
That should just be the title of this episode. That's a good one.
It really should. The founding fathers of Batman. I like that. Who are the pillars that make up the foundation of who Batman is?
So, as also, for people in the comments, feel free to post your thoughts as well, either going along while you're listening to this or after the fact, because there's so many people who have been on the character, it's impossible to cover everyone, but we're just going to go through a small section of who we think. So, if you feel free to disagree or argue against our points, because that's what we're here for, to have fun.
Exactly, and I think it's important to note, too, that these might not be, my favorite, like a list of my favorite Batman writers, but rather who I think are instrumental to the foundation of who the character is. Because there are some people that I'm going to leave off this list that I like better than the people that I have on the list, but I don't believe they're instrumental to who Batman is as a character. Yeah,
so again, we might have to, as we talk about it, we're probably going to mention as well where we like them as writers rather than their actual iconography, like what they affected the cultural impact of Batman. So we may have to touch on this topic again with our actual favorite Batman writers, maybe in a roundtable format. But for now, I guess we should just get started. I'll go first with the elephant in the room. I've got number 1, Bill Finger.
Bill Finger, I do agree, Bill Finger, and actually that would be my number 1 as well. So I'm glad that we share a number 1. And I'm glad that our number 1 is not Bob Kane. If it was just Bob Kane, we might not even have this podcast.
Oh no, we don't deserve to be called World's Finest if we say Bob Kane.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I am so glad, honestly, that we finally are in an age where they do honor Bill Finger as a co-creator of Batman instead of it just being Bob Kane.
Yeah.
The idea of who Batman is and the idea of who we think Batman is all stems back to Bill Finger rather than Bob Kane.
Because I think there's a awesome documentary. I haven't seen it, but I've seen trailers on it, so it actually might already be out by the time when we do recording this. It's Bob Kane and Batman, I believe the title is. And yeah, there's stuff like that coming out is really showing people just how, like, have you seen the original Bob Kane sketches for Batman? He's looks like some kind of mix between Jay Garrick and Captain America, but he's like blonde hair with like a domino mask, and he doesn't seem like Bob Kane in interviews before he passed. He's always proclaiming how he liked the dark, mysterioso Batman. Whereas if you look at his initial concept before Bill Finger came on, that is not a dark, mysterioso character.
No, it's not. It's like, Batman in canon draws his a lot of like his motivations from seeing the movie The Legend of Zorro, and I think Bob Kane's idea was more akin to like a Legend of Zorro kind of character rather than what Bill Finger added in that makes the character so instrumental to really all of pop culture.
Definitely. Part of why I also like Bill Finger is I feel like he really, reading back in some of these old comics in the Batman Chronicles and the Golden Age of Batman, these like beautiful trades that they've come out recently, and before that in like DC Showcase. Some of my favorite issues I'll just name off is like the People versus Batman, and he really gets across early on, like it's surprising, all of the core arguments and tenements of Batman that we still argue and present in stories today. Like, does Batman create more trouble than he solves? Like, is he as a character actually able to function as Batman and Bruce Wayne. Like in that story, Bruce Wayne is framed for murder, and Batman has to rescue Bruce Wayne, like through a circumstance of robbing him. And also, the Crook, name fails me, but it's a issue. I believe it's one of the early issues of Batman, not Detective, but it's Batman goes after a crook who only stole $8 because his wife was sick, and then Batman gives him the money, and it's like just you feel like early on you're like, oh, they're already acknowledging that Batman beating up the poor disenfranchised of Gotham isn't what the character is about, which is a lot of critics of Batman. Yeah.
Well, and that's a topic that could be an episode on itself, is just discussing the core values of Batman and whether or not he's actually like a successful hero, or whether you can even label him as a hero. But when you really look at it, like I said, we would not be able to even have this conversation if Bob Kane had been the only one writing that book. And it blows my mind, honestly, how Bill Finger was able to bring these ideas forward at a time where those ideas were kind of, out there, like outside the box. These were kids' comics. They were meant to, entertain a kid while their parents were sitting there getting their hair cut or something like that. Yeah. And it's amazing that we can look back on it now, years later, with the ungodly amount of Batman material there is to read and continues to be made. And we can see that, like, these ideas that we almost call tropes now, like these common tropes that Batman has, all stem back to original, fresh ideas from the mind of Bill Finger. Yeah,
he'd certainly, I think the phrase, he was ahead of his time, really speaks volumes here. Like, he's...
Yep.
Like, I believe he even wrote an episode or two uncredited, because what writers back in the day would have to do is they would just get hired freelance, paid by person, and you wouldn't be credited, but you'd just write the stories and then you'd move on to a different project. It isn't how we have now, where writers do very long runs on the character and like tied with the character, like you see on the newspaper articles or something like Tom King Batman. It's like that wasn't how it was back in the day. It was much more the company, the character, and then the creators, especially like early on 30s, 40s, not mentioned like big names at all.
Well, no, and that's an issue that doesn't just rest with Batman. That's an issue that goes with, like, Superman, like the creators of Superman, especially Jerry Siegel.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the stories that revolve around creator rights and the way that these companies, really screwed these people out of a lot of money, it's both heartbreaking, but it's also a blessing that we've come so far from that, because in today's culture, that would you couldn't do that, and I'm so glad that you can't do that, because it's really a disgusting practice. You want to say, oh, it was the times, but looking back on it, like these people, whether it's Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel or Bob Kane and Bill Finger, like we wouldn't have a 75-year edition of Batman and Superman without these guys. And the fact that at the time these companies were basically holding the rights and holding money over their heads and almost just like laughing at them, where they have to go through these intricate court cases and they have to fight till they're like, I think to Jerry Siegel's actually till his last breath he still fought. It's really, really sad. It's one of the most heartbreaking stories of the early days of comics.
And I think it's also one of the most important, because it shows that the spirits of these characters, who we value so much, came from some people who really knew the value of them. They didn't get doing it for the publicity. They just wanted to make good stories. And sadly, people whose that wasn't their main interest sacrifice a lot of the gain and publicity that these people actually really did deserve. So it's important now that we look back and remember, no, these young guys, they really did deserve it, because they were damn good storytellers.
Oh, well, yeah, beyond the shadow of a doubt. And I think, yeah, you just have to look at these guys, and like you said, you have to realize that they weren't signing these gigantic contracts like creators are today. And no respect to creators of today, they're getting signed for Batman because, A, they want to write Batman, but B, because they deserve to be on the book. Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman, they're flagship titles. And so the people that get signed to those books need to realize that, they are writing a character that's had a 75-year history. And, everybody's got their own taste and everything like that. But, like you said, when you get down to the core of it, who the people that created Batman are, they're not these guys that signed, a contract that would help them live comfortably.
Well, Bob Kane was.
Yeah. It would, nowadays, if tomorrow DC Comics called me and said, "Hey, you want to write Batman?" I would move out of my parents' house today. I would go back in time and move out of my parents' house because that's how much money I'd be making. Whereas in, the 60s, you were signed to write Batman, and you were writing a funny book, and you were writing a funny book in a time where they were scrutinized because of the Comics Code Authority. And so, this idea that Bill Finger, and really I think Bill Finger has to be the first face.
Yes, definitely.
We're going to be talking about the other three people we were going to put on there, but without a doubt, as you're creating your Mount Rushmore, the very first face you have to put on there is Bill Finger's face, without a doubt. No matter who came after him, no matter who, rocketed Batman to the front of the sales, anything like that, Bill Finger's face has to be number one because he's the reason everybody else was able to follow him.
I guess a question I'll pose to you quickly then before we move on to the next face is going strictly to the core of Bill Finger as a writer, as a storyteller. What is one element he gave to the character of Batman that you think is essential in your mind, that you think this is why he deserves to be here above all else, strictly from a storytelling perspective?
Well, strictly from a storytelling perspective is, you mentioned a great one earlier, which is that debate that we often have with Batman, which is he a hero or not? And the fact that we can debate about that is a testament to the strength of Bill Finger's storytelling. Because when you look at a character like Batman, you have a legitimate reason to say that guy's not a hero. That guy beats up mentally handicapped people and throws them in a asylum that is more like a prison.
With a revolving door.
Yeah, right. Yeah, literally sometimes actually throws them into this asylum. And so you have to think, is that really what a hero does? Is a hero somebody that, stalks the knights and then descends down from the rooftops to crush the hood of a car, frightening everybody inside and then picking them off one by one? Or is that a vigilante? And then you have to look at, is vigilante justice, is that still justice we should follow? Is that somebody we should look up to? The answer obviously for me is that Batman is a hero. You can't, shoot Darkseid with a bullet made from his own son and not be a hero. But Bill Finger introducing that era, that idea behind Batman, instead of just having him be a standard long underwear character, is a reason he should be the number one face of Batman.
I couldn't have said it better myself, man. I guess from my perspective on what element I think is essential kind of mirrors yours, in that the debate of Batman being such a morally ambiguous character, at least from the outside, just from straight face value, he looks like a demon. That's already a very big risk to take with a character intended for children. He's a scary looking character, which of course, in his initial appearance, it softened over the years. And while a lot of people can say that's a bad thing, personally, one of my reasons I'm going to say is I think the introduction of Robin is one of the most genius moves in the entire history of comics. You have a character like Batman who, his strength is that he's so mysterious and we can't get inside of his head. So the idea of a character beside him who you can relate to either both strengthens Batman and that character, because you weren't never supposed to be Batman. You can look up to Batman, but Bruce Wayne is such an individual character with such finely defined values, it's hard to place yourself as him. So by creating a character the younger audience can relate to and can talk to with Batman, you can fight alongside Batman. It makes a bridge between the reader and the character, which simply wasn't ever seen before, and I'd argue hasn't been seen since. Like, Batman and Robin is just so synonymous in our minds now. And I thought it was just a stroke of genius to do that.
Oh, no, I completely agree. You know, there's a reason that they're household names. There's a reason that people that don't even read comics or, you know, go to see the movies, there's a reason that they'll wear Batman and Robin shirts. And that's because the strength of that duo is it moves beyond the pages and it moves beyond the screen. And yeah, I hadn't even thought about, you know, the introduction of Robin, but you're right, because and I guess this will segue into the next face that I would put. But there's a documentary that came out around the time that The Dark Knight was released that basically featured like the psychology of Batman villains and of Batman himself. And they interviewed a lot of different creators. They interviewed actually some like real world psychologists. And one of the people they interviewed was Denny O'Neil. And he mentioned about like the fact that if you really believed in yourself and you really put forth the time and the effort, you could be Batman. And I love Denny O'Neil to death, and he's the second face on my mind. But I honestly don't agree with that, because even if you had enough money, even if you had the physical strength, the mental determination, everything, you still couldn't be Batman, because there's a reason that no one else wants to take the cowl, and there's a reason that when other people do take the cowl, they don't wear it for very long, and that's because no one could be Bruce Wayne. And so to introduce a character like Robin, to kind of, piggyback off of what you were saying, to introduce a character like Robin that you could be Robin. You could be a kid that Batman picks up and says, you're my ally. And you could be that kid that is hopeful and, gives Batman something to look forward to, instead of just having Batman, go out on patrol alone every night. He has somebody there by his side to, go over things with and to help them improve, so that way they can help him improve. And so I do think that the introduction of Robin is another reason that Bill Finger should be on the first face. But the second face, for me at least, has to be Denny O'Neil. And for the sole reason, well, one of the reasons, has to be because he made Batman cool again. I mean, you had an era of Batman which nowadays people look back on fondly, but you had an era of Batman that was Batman hangs out with Santa Claus, and Batman has Snickers ads in his comic.
But
and
Batman still has Snickers ads in his comics.
He but you know what I mean. Like, they were very lighthearted, and everything was they moved into an era where the culture itself was lighthearted, or it was trying to be, and so Batman had to be lighthearted. And then Denny O'Neil comes on the book, and Denny O'Neil brings this like suave detective vibe to Batman that almost mirrors, I guess, the James Bond franchise in a way. He was a detective again. He had different loves in his life. And he was, and they brought the best look for Batman, which is that iconic blue and silver with the gold symbol on his chest.
Oh, perfection.
Yeah, it's the best look. And that could be another episode, is the looks of Batman. But,
we've got content coming your way for years, folks. Don't worry about that.
We really do, yeah. The Batman content alone is going to be endless. The character is a abyssal goldmine, but Denny O'Neil is just one of those guys that got it. He understood that, okay, the times are changing, Batman has to change, and you look no further than Batman and Ra's al Ghul fighting shirtless in the desert with swords, and you're like, or the fact that Denny O'Neil wrote the concept of Batman having a son with Talia al Ghul that wasn't picked up on until Grant Morrison found it years later. And I feel like Denny O'Neil, he's not an underrated Batman creator, but he's a name that doesn't get enough mention these days.
Yeah, he's not known outside of the comic fandom in the ways that other people on this list may be.
Exactly, right. I mean, you look at Denny O'Neil, like if I were to go talk to somebody on the street and I would say, hey, do you know who Frank Miller is? There's a good chance they'll know who Frank Miller is. And there's a good chance they'll say, oh, Frank Miller wrote Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
Or he's the Batman guy. But if I went to somebody on the street and I said, hey, do you know who Denny O'Neil is? They might say, no, I really don't. And I think that's a shame. I feel like Denny O'Neil should be a household name. And without a doubt, I couldn't think of anybody else that I would rather have as my second face of my Mount Rushmore of Batman.
Well, we should have just made this a combined list because he was my second too.
Wow.
Yeah. I can't. Once you write Venom, or you write Shaman, or you write Joker's 5-Way Revenge, like, you have to be on here. Good God.
Yeah.
Like, the amount of. Well, personally, I love like every era of Batman, like unequivocally. Despite like everyone has their taste with Batman. Like, there's no one right way to do Batman. That's the beauty of the character. Is
exactly.
Everyone has the different takes. But while after the 60s show ended, there was a conscious effort to make Batman closer to his roots, and some of the writers before O'Neill came on were bringing more one-off, darker tone stories. But you are right in it, he's the one who really got the ball rolling, like, no, this is definitely the route we need to stick with. He was like the showrunner, for like a sense. Like, him and Neil Adams was such like a perfect lightning in a bottle combo at that specific moment in time. It just worked. Like, you had just gorgeous art paired with like absolutely like heartbreaking, hilarious, like badass, just top tier writing that defined Batman for a whole new era. And I think it's good that we have Bill Finger and Denny O'Neil so close together, because they really feel like they touch upon the same. Like, a lot of different Batman writers have different styles. Like, later on in the list, we might talk about people who have different takes on Bruce. But Denny O'Neil's Bruce really does feel like an evolution of the one that started all the way back in Detective Comics. He feels like the guy who could. You're not quite sure if he's all on the up and up. Like, from a distance, when you just see this cloaked shadow, he's very little dialogue, but when he says something, it's important. Like, he's not, especially compared to a lot of other characters at that time, it became popular to have like copious amounts of dialogue, and that was just how comics were written. But Batman specifically, he would say the odd one or two things, but normally it'd be at the end of an issue where he'd say like one long thing, and he'd be like, oh, that's a Batman moment.
Right.
He's really, he's kind of the master at showing the different facets of Batman and making him human while still remaining the Dark Knight. Like, there's that scene in Venom where he has to detox himself, and he just locks himself away in the Batcave for like a month, and he comes out and he's like completely disheveled, like big massive bushy beard, like,
right.
It's like the thing you were saying against Raish, is when he's fighting him, you see hairs on Batman's chest. Like, you see, we've got a character now who feels like a man. Like, he's flesh and blood, and he can be hurt and he can be killed, but he won't be, because he's prepared for that.
And I think a lot of what Denny Block's character is a reflection of himself, because you mentioned the Venom storyline, and as great Denny O'Neil is, the one demon that Denny O'Neil always had was his alcoholism. And for him to put a character like Batman, a character that, is a pillar to DC Comics. DC Comics probably wouldn't exist without Batman. To have Batman get addicted for a very short time, but get addicted to a drug like Venom, that's a bold move. Like, that's a move that you wouldn't have seen anybody else at the time take.
And it could have easily gone wrong.
It could have. It could have signaled like a death shot for the character. And you know, there are so many stories that Denny O'Neil did at the time, and with all the different characters. Like you mentioned, Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. I mean, they had Green Lantern and Green Arrow. Denny O'Neil also went on to do The Question, which is a run that I've only read 5 issues of, but the 5 issues that I've read leave me wanting more, and I am severely disappointed in the fact that it is so hard.
Yeah, I've always wanted to get into that because I like The Question as a character, but I can't find the trades for the life of me. Like
they're like, you have to go through Amazon, and then you have to, sell your left arm to get you to give you their first volume of The Question. And I mean, I've tried asking at different shops, I've tried asking everywhere, and nobody seems to have this first trade of The Question. And if it's out there, I'm looking for you. I want you to know I'm speaking to the first volume directly. I want you to know that I am searching for you, and one day we will find each other.
We will leave Jake's P.O. box in the description, where any of you listening with that first volume can send it.
Yes. Christmas is coming up, guys. I've been real good this year, so if you could leave me that, I would love that. But no, you look at Denny O'Neil at the time was just crafting these masterful stories. And there was really not another person that could have taken Batman into the forefront like Denny O'Neil did. And he's just, I guess I don't want to repeat myself, but I wish he was a household name.
Yeah.
I wish that more people looked at Denny O'Neil in the light that he deserves to be looked at, especially because he's at the point where we probably won't see any other Denny O'Neil stories. Neil Adams is still creating things. There's a lot of those creators that are still from that era that are still creating, still writing, still drawing. But Denny O'Neil isn't anymore. So what we have from Denny O'Neil is what we're always going to have. And so I feel like we should, as a whole, just appreciate what he gave us, because Bill Finger kind of laid out the blueprint. If Batman is a house, Bill Finger made the blueprint for the house. And then Denny O'Neil came in and built the foundation. And so if we're looking at the Mount Rushmore, you have Bill Finger and then Denny O'Neil. And if you're looking at it as a house, right now you have somebody that laid out the plans, and you have somebody that created the base for what other people would come in and touch up on. Because if you look at, Batman writers that followed Denny O'Neil, so many of them drew directly from what he put down. I mean, even someone as recent as Scott Snyder, in his arc, The Death of the Family, when he had the Joker basically recreating all of his, most famous crimes, pulled directly from Denny O'Neil. And there's a reason for that. Denny O'Neil is one of those guys that deserves to be not just on the Batman Mount Rushmore, but I would even say Denny O'Neil deserves to be on the DC Comics Mount Rushmore.
Especially with how influential after he stopped writing the stories and became an editor, he helped so many different people, like during Nightfall and other books. Like, you can look it up. Like, he's on everything, and I believe he's even quoted as saying that he doesn't really like it when he's credited as an editor, because although he acknowledges that his job is to steer things, he doesn't want people to know because that's not it's not his story. He's just making sure everything's going okay. But when he's writing, he wants people to know, and I respect that so much.
Yeah, and that's something that you get from somebody that has been a creator before, which is why I really like it when people that have been creators in the past move on to be editors, because they know.
They get it.
And what they're willing to bring to the table as an editor is probably so much, so much more varied than what you would get from somebody that's only ever been an editor. And that's not a discredit to any editors out there. The editors are there for a reason, and we get the stories we get because of the help, like because the editors are there to help. But you can't. It's hard to compare any other editor to an editor that goes by the name of Denny O'Neil. I mean, especially if you got him on a book like Batman, as a Batman writer, that would be the dream. To come onto the book, you get your artist, you get your colorist, you get your inker, you get your letterer, and then you look and your editor is Denny O'Neil. That would be the dream come true. Yeah, he's so much better than people give him credit for. And I think Denny O'Neil and what he gave to the character is a large part of who the third face on my Mount Rushmore will be. Yeah, but I think the third one's going to be a little controversial. But we'll see. A lot of people may not like the third face, but I think that the third face on my Mount Rushmore is a little it's hard to overlook what he brought to Batman. Now I'll ask you if you could see Denny O'Neil come back to comics, the gods of comics grant us one last Denny O'Neil miniseries. What would you like to see Denny O'Neil come back to comics for?
Oh, way to put me on the spot, Jake. No, I think, I think it would only be fitting, because after he took a break from writing Batman, he came back on a couple of years later and did one of my favourite stories, Birth of the Demon.
Right, yes.
The origin of Raish. So I think I would love to see him write a Damian story.
Oh, yeah, that would be to see his, the family line that he created come full circle.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Because I feel like that confrontation between Damian and Raish hasn't happened yet in a satisfying way, and I think we really need a story. Like, it's been hinted at, but it's always been him and his mother rather than him and his grandfather, and I feel like there's a lot of material there, and I think O'Neil being the creator of Raish, this would be like full circle, like it to get everything wrapped up. And now that I've said that, I'm annoyed that we probably won't ever get that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when you think about it, he's really technically the creator of Damian.
Yeah.
Grant Morrison gave him a name,
but the concept, yeah.
Gave the idea to him. So yeah, that would be if you could get, if the comics gods would grant one wish, you could get Denny O'Neil and Jim Aparo back to do a Damian and Ra's al Ghul miniseries. Yeah, I think even if it wouldn't sell well, which I couldn't imagine it not selling well, but even if it didn't sell well, I think I could die a happy comics fan knowing that we got to see Denny O'Neil complete the circle on Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul. Now, I guess transitioning out of the second face of our Mount Rushmore, who is your third face?
Oh, well, from the way you've built up yours, I feel like this is where we're going to have a first split, which I'm quite curious. We're kind of going to move slightly out of comics, but he's still a comics writer, and my third face is Paul Dini.
Oh, wow. Okay. No, I can definitely see that. Yeah, because he's done both. He's been out of comics, and he's definitely been in comics as well.
And I feel specifically if we're going to be talking about Batman in the public sense, what people define as Batman, I really think the value of the animated series and most recently the Arkham games, the first two at least, can't be diminished in how that's shaped so many people's views of Batman. That's made so many new fans who would never pick up a comic book in their life, and it's defined the character for them. And they're fans of just the other media of Batman, fans of just the cartoons, fans of just the movies, fans of just video games. Their love of Batman is just as real as anyone else, like if you're comics or whatnot. It doesn't matter what you experience the character, as long as you understand the core tenets. And I think Dini is probably one of the greatest writers in being able to transition Batman from multiple forms of media. Like, animated series just speaks of itself. Like, you get the Mr. Freeze episodes, you get the Harley Quinn and her interaction to the comics itself because she was such a beloved character, and then you get the Arkham games, and you get like such a rich world of a Batman that's been lived in, like animated series, but it's also got that darkness, and it's got such a his final confrontation with the Joker in Arkham City is just like, that's how I see the character ending. That's just so perfect of their relationship. And I feel like Dini really gets, more so than the Batman, I think he really gets Bruce Wayne. I think he's writes, out of all the people on my list, I think he writes the most human Bruce Wayne. Everyone can have their taste of whether he writes a Bruce Wayne who's maybe too human. But I think it's still a very valid and interesting take that has shaped a lot of what people view Batman in the public consciousness.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Paul Dini is how, like you said, how many different ways he's presented Batman. And, just further beyond the animated series and the Arkham games and even his run on the comics.
Yeah, Detective, it's brilliant.
Yeah, and then his most recent Batman release was the Dark Knight, a true Batman story, which I don't know if you've read this.
Yeah, I have read it. I was going to mention it, but carry on.
It is heartbreaking. It might be the most heartbreaking thing I've read in the past couple years, and it's not just a Paul Dini story, but it's also a Batman story. It's a story about how, for Paul Dini, he'll always be linked to Batman. And that, just because Batman is a character that appears, on a game console or on a movie screen or in the pages of a comic book, doesn't mean that he doesn't have real world effects on the people that create him, or even the people that read him and take him in. You see a lot of these people that write letters to creators that say, I was in a really dark place, and reading your Batman, pulled me out of it. And for Paul Dini, that's an actual thing that happened to him. He, as a creator of Batman, during a time when he was actively creating Batman, was put through a horrible life trauma that the idea of Batman and the idea of the Joker really, were at war in his head. The demon on his shoulder and the angel on his shoulder, which is ironic that Batman would be the...
Yeah. It's such a gorgeous, thing about the character.
Exactly, yeah. He's an embodiment of darkness that brings light. And it's honestly one of the things that when I get going and I really talk about Batman, it's one of those things that makes me the most emotional about him, is that he's this character that everything about him screams darkness. He's clad in black and gray. His vehicle is meant to glide through the night unseen. All of his tools are meant to make him, invisible to criminals and those that he's preying upon. But at the core value of Batman is this idea that one man brings light to a city that doesn't want to be in the light. In a city of perpetual darkness, Batman is a light that shines on Gotham City. And I think when you look at someone like Paul Dini, he really brings that to the character. Whether it's through the animated series or it's through the games or his comics, he shows more than anybody else that Batman is a light created from darkness. And I think that's because that's how he saw Batman. From his own darkness, he saw this bat symbol made of light that pulled him out and, got him going. At a point in time where he didn't want to keep going, which is a stark contrast, I guess, from my third face on the Batman Mount Rushmore, which is Frank Miller.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Now, this is where I was kind of mentioning earlier that I may not view Frank Miller's Batman as my favorite Batman, but it is hard for me to deny the impact he had on the Batman community.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, with the creation of The Dark Knight Returns and The Dark Knight Strikes Again, Batman Year One, All-Star Batman and Robin, whether or not you agree with the way he presents the character always, there's a reason that The Dark Knight Returns is still one of DC's best-selling graphic novels. Whenever you go into a comic shop and you hear people say, I'm trying to get into Batman, what's one of the first things I should read from Batman? Oftentimes it's The Dark Knight Returns.
Or Year One, yeah. So it's like...
Yeah, and there's a reason. Without examining every story down to the most minute detail, you have these iconic moments that have literally been pulled from Frank Miller's pages and thrown into other pop culture. Like, how many times is the lightning scene from Batman, where the bolt of lightning strikes behind the silhouette of Batman, how many times has that been ripped off by every other piece of pop culture? How many times have we seen a rendition of the Yes, Father, I Shall Become a Bat scene? You look at the iconic imagery of Batman bursting through the window on the people of Gotham. Ladies and gentlemen of Gotham, you've eaten well. It's hard to look past Frank Miller as a reason that Batman, was pulled from, because, Denny O'Neil, like I said, is a very underrated Batman creator, but I don't think his books, even as good as they are, sell as well as Frank Miller's, because Frank Miller's just strike in a way that other writers don't.
Yeah.
It's a lot to do with the world he presents Batman in. You could really argue that Frank Miller's Batman exists in a world that's darker than any other creator's Batman. Yeah, which is why, he's even, his own, Frank Miller verse is suggested as an Elseworld. In the recent, Multiversity guidebook, there's hints that one of the multiverses in DC is a Frank Miller verse. And
where every building is sexualized.
Yeah, and I know that people will probably say he shouldn't be on this list because of All-Star Batman and Robin. I look at that story through a much different set of eyes than I think everybody else does. I look at that story as really a stroke of brilliance on Frank Miller's part, because it's so uncharacteristically Batman. It's a very uncharacteristic version of Batman, I should say. It's a Batman that calls a small child retarded. It's a Batman that has sex with Black Canary on the docks. It's a Batman that exists in a world where they literally paint Green Lantern's room yellow to defeat him. But the reason that I think it's brilliant is because it is Frank Miller basically looking at a fandom that complains a lot. That says, I don't like this version of Batman, or why is Batman always like this? Why is Batman always a detective? Why is he always brooding? Why is he always dark? And Frank Miller basically took all of those complaints aimed towards a character that's been around for almost 80 years now, and presented a version that is basically saying, this could be Batman. You could be living in an era where every month, this is the Batman you get. And I think he knew that it would be hated. I think he knew that it would be reviled. But I think he wanted it to be reviled and hated, because if in hating and reviling All-Star Batman and Robin, you appreciate the Batman that we have in our actual continuity more. Which people might think that's me giving Frank Miller too much credit. But Frank Miller is a guy that really brings these different facets of Batman that nobody else brings. He doesn't write the best Bruce Wayne. He doesn't really even write the best Batman. He writes probably the most quotable Batman. I mean, his Batman is probably quoted more than anybody else's. I mean, if you type in Batman quotes into Google, probably the first 10 that show up, or within the first 10 that show up, 7 of them are going to be Frank Miller's quotes.
There's actually a game online where it's a quiz. It's like Batman or Shakespeare, and it will show you quotes, and most of those are Frank Miller Batman quotes.
That's great.
I think as well, like, going back to your point, I'm so glad you've said this, because I'm a big Daredevil fan as well as Batman, and Frank Miller, I love his work on there so much, and his Batman work as well, with what you were saying with All-Star. It's a direct... I think that's also what it could be applied to all of his work, because really every time he writes Batman, he's writing him differently, because he's not writing Batman for the sake of writing Batman. Every time he writes a book, he's writing it for a specific purpose or a specific reaction. Like Dark Knight, I think Dark Knight Strikes Again is the greatest example of this. Like Grant Morrison has pointed this out before. Like in the middle of that book, 9/11 happens, and then
I'm so glad you mentioned this, because this is going to be something that I mentioned too. Yeah,
it's like the whole tone and shift of the book shifts to be a direct commentary of how he's feeling at that time, and it's the job of an artist. There's actually a nice interview with young Frank Miller, and he looks so different, like with long hair, and like it's just really weird to see. But he talks about when after he kind of got propelled to comic book rock star after Dark Knight Returns, he talks about he was so glad to be able to not only just write that book, but to draw it as well. And it's just his piece. It's just him speaking about Batman. And I think that's such a it happens a lot in the East with manga and comic books, is there's just one person doing their story. And while there's no right way to do it, but like it's a very unique take that I think is what kind of gave Dark Knight Returns an edge, because it was so different. It was so focused. He got to put exactly what he was thinking on the page. And to say it paid off is an understatement, because it's always talked about. Like, it's always going to be mentioned with next to Batman. I think, arguably, probably most definitely, is the most well-known Batman story, and probably will remain the most well-known Batman story.
Oh, I think you could argue that it's number 1 or number 2, with the opposite being The Killing Joke. I feel like you could, when you say name a Batman story, the first 3 that people mention are probably The Dark Knight Returns, The Killing Joke, and another popular one is Hush, because it's a lot of people's first introduction to Batman that they're given. And if you look at The Dark Knight Returns, just as a standalone story, that story in 4 parts is the most brilliantly put together piece of writing that you'll find, and as far like from that era, or really any era, because the first part is Batman and Two-Face, and it's Batman versus his own reflection of himself. One of his best friends, Harvey Dent, is one of his greatest failures, because he couldn't save Harvey Dent from becoming Two-Face. And so the first chapter is Batman versus his own reflection. The second chapter, which is Batman the Mutants, which, if you're talking best Batman fights, which we're finding old episodes here, best Batman fights could be an episode itself too.
Yeah.
The Mud Pit fight is, without doubt, like one of the top 3, maybe 5 best Batman fights all time.
I'm the surgeon.
Yeah, and I'm the surgeon. Find a more quotable Batman line. You probably can't. But that's Batman versus the future. This is what crime has evolved to beyond Batman. Batman is moving out of his prime, but crime is continually reinventing its prime, which I think is a core piece of Batman. Is that Batman being immortal, amortal? I don't want to mispronounce that and have it sound like immortal.
Well, Batman is immortal.
He is. Batman is immortal, but Bruce Wayne being amortal, he has to continuously keep up with an entity. Crime itself is an entity in Batman, and it's an entity that is always reinventing itself. It's the concept that that evil doesn't necessarily know that it's evil. It just exists because it wants to exist too. And that is what Miller presents in Batman versus the Mutant Gang. This is what crime will turn into. And then you have Batman and the Joker, the third chapter, which is Batman versus chaos. You can argue that Batman is a hero, I don't really like when people just say he's a hero about vengeance. I don't feel like that's all that he is. I feel like above all else, Batman is a hero about order. And he's a hero that is born from an act of chaos, random chaos, that threw his life into total disarray. And for the rest of his life, Bruce Wayne and Batman, intertwined together, are continuously trying to maintain order so that random acts of chaos like that never happen again. But the reflection of that is the Joker, who is the epitome of chaos. He's the definition of a chaotic being that will do anything to really just to do anything. He's obviously the cliche pick for #1 Batman villain, but that's because of the rivalry they share, the dichotomy between them. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the fourth part of that, which is Batman versus Superman, and it's Batman versus God. It's a story that builds with each growing chapter, and that's a reason it survives. And that's a reason that I think Frank Miller has to be, on the Mount Rushmore of Batman, because he brought to the table something that will be used forever, for as long as we are able to live on this earth. People will always look to The Dark Knight Returns as an introduction to Batman. Now, another, introduction piece to Batman is written by my fourth face on the Mount Rushmore of Batman, and really my #1 face on the comics Mount Rushmore. Not just DC Comics, but comics as a whole.
I think for you listening at home, this one might tell you how we all feel on this podcast.
Yes, this fourth face on the Mount Rushmore Batman is none other than Grant Morrison.
And unfortunately, we're going to have to cut it short there, old chum. However, don't you fret. We will be back with a brand new episode focusing entirely on our #4 pick, Grant Morrison. That's right. This time it's going to be an hour-long deep discussion about his entire run. Don't miss it.